1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Love is patient. And everybody said, ain't nobody got time for that. Shout out to Sweet Brown for giving us maybe the most popular quote of the last decade. 3 people got that, but it's true. Right, as we're about to find out, the truth for a lot of us in here, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, is that at the end of the day, I don't really have that much time for the kind of love that the Apostle Paul calls us to. Just quick context, if you're not familiar, or maybe you just only heard this at a wedding, that line is from 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13 is a chapter in one of 2 letters that Paul wrote to a church in a city called Corinth several thousand years ago. And believe it or not, when Paul wrote 1 Corinthians 13, he wasn't trying to be poetic. Right? I don't know if you know that or not, but when Paul was writing these words, he wasn't trying to be cute. He wasn't thinking that someday you were going to want to get married, and you're going to have a friend that's not going to make the cut for the bridal party, and you're going to feel kind of bad. You want to give them a consolation prize, like you want them to read scripture in the passage so they can have our part in your wedding. And you're like, wouldn't it be nice to have something cute that someone can read at a wedding? And Paul's like, I got your back, bro. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That's not what Paul was thinking. Okay, when Paul, it's true. It's true. When you're going through that list, like, what can we give them? Sit the grandparents or read scripture? That's great. But when Paul wrote this, I have to preach. You guys need to stop laughing. You're distracting me. I'm just kidding. When he wrote this, Paul wrote this because he was speaking directly to a church and a community of people that had a list of relational issues that's longer than the line at Popeyes on Seco Road. I don't know if you ever tried to go there before, but it's kind of crazy. And that's why Paul wrote this. Paul wrote this because he had to stand in between, literally, groups of people in the church who were trying to rip each other's faces out. Okay, they were like in such turmoil and in such conflict that Paul had to step in, and he had to remind them what we talked about in week 1. If you missed it, it's on the YouTubes. But Paul is basically saying to these guys, hey, just so you know, the most tangible expression of your love for God is your love for your neighbor. Right? There's no way around it. Okay, the most tangible expression of your love for God is not how much you pray or how much you go to church or how much you read your Bible. Those things are all great things, but biblically speaking, the most tangible expression of your love for God is how well you love your neighbor. And that's why Paul wrote 1 Corinthians chapter 13, please fasten your seatbelts. Make sure your tray tables are upright position because we're about to hit some turbulence because this is crazy. Listen to what he says. And yet, Paul says, I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak, he says, in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging symbol, right? Is what Paul's saying here. Sorry, David. I'm all up in your grill. I mean, think how annoying this. Can you guys even hear me? This is so annoying. No offense to Larry and Lloyd, but that's the most annoying sound in the world. And what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 13 is that, hey, if you're that guy, which there were these people in the Corinthian church, that, man, when you speak, it's incredible. You speak not only in the tongues of men, but you speak in the tongues of angels, and everybody's like, wow, we've never heard anyone talk like that before. If you do that, but you don't have love, guess what? That's what you are. You are annoying. But Paul takes it a step further. Listen to what he says in verse 2. If I have the gift of prophecy, and I can fathom not some, not most, all mysteries and all knowledge. So imagine that guy that's like, you got any mystery, anything you need to know, I know it all. If I am that guy, Paul says, and if I have faith that can move mountains. I mean, just think about that. Imagine being the guy or someone that has so much faith, they can look at Mount Everest where's Mount Everest at? Who knows? Anybody? In the Himalayas? He's like, all right, a different country. That's a good answer, right? Can you imagine if you had the kind of faith that you could look at Mount Everest, Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania and say, hey, I'm going to move you from there to a different place. If you have that kind of faith, Paul says, but don't have love, you have nothing. Verse 3. If I give all that I possess to the poor, everything I got, here's my wallet, here's my car, here's my house, here's my PlayStation, here are my Jordans, right? Here are my kids. No, not your kids. If I give everything, just imagine now, you're like, man, I'm so generous, I'm so motivated and compelled by my love for God that I will literally give everything I own to the poor. If you do that, Paul says, and if you give your body over to hardship, another translation says, if you give your body to the flames, that you may boast but do not have love, you gain nada. Translation, what Paul is arguing here is that spiritual maturity has nothing to do with how much you know, how much you can prophesy, how much you can speak in tongues of men or tongues of angels, or even how much faith you have. According to Paul in the Bible, spiritual maturity is best measured by how well you love your neighbor. Okay, so when you walked in the room today, just so you know, the most spiritual person in the room and the most spiritual person online right now is not the person that knows the most Bible or the person that has the most faith or the person that sang a song or even the person preaching. Biblically speaking, the most spiritually mature people in every room are the people that love others the best. And so Paul is setting us up here. Don't you love when the Bible sets you up, right? Right? I mean, he's building this case. Like all of these things that we look at and we go, man, that's what makes you spiritual, man. If you do that, man, you're just like, and Paul's just kind of one by one, just taking the bricks apart and just saying none of that matters if you don't have love. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of wish he would have stopped there. Right? It would have been nice if 1 Corinthians was only the first 3 verses, you know? And I'm like, okay, I get it. You want me to be loving. Okay, I'm going to do that. I wish he would have taken the subjective approach to loving your neighbor. Right? Because if Paul would have taken the subjective approach to loving your neighbor, then, this is not a very challenging conversation. Because who's to say who loves their neighbor and who doesn't? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, I don't know. Like, who's to say? You know, it's like country music. It's like so subjective, right? Who's to say? Some people think it's really good. Other people who have good taste in music and a renewed mind think it's trash. But who's to say? I'm just kidding. Calm down. I don't think country music is trash. I know it's trash. Just kidding. That's a different sermon. But you know what I mean, though? Like if Paul's just like, hey, you should love your neighbor, we're all like, well, I'm giving myself at least a C, right? I mean, I've never met a church person that's like, I'm just horrible at loving people. We're like, yeah, I'm not Mother Teresa. Nobody's Mother. Can we just say that? That's what we're all like. We're not Mother Teresa. But I get at least a C. Hate to break it to you, but Paul doesn't do that. Paul refuses to make this subjective. Paul decides that he's going to give us a baseline. And Paul decides that not only is he going to give us a baseline for what it means and looks like to love our neighbor, but he's going to make it so objective, so practical, it will be really, really hard for you to not know where you stand. So first 3 verses, he sets us up, and then he says this in verse 4. Love is patient. You guys remember that scene from The Office when Michael sees Toby for the first time when he came back? He didn't believe. And you guys know what I'm talking about? And he's like, no, God, no. He just is freaking out. I'm serious. When I was preparing for this message and I saw that was my reaction. I'm like, no. Right? Of all of the adjectives, of all of the descriptions that Paul could have picked, why did he start with patience? Right? I was telling these guys during run-through, I'm like, this is going to be an interesting message because I'm preaching about something I'm not good at all. Right? I don't know about anybody else in here, but I may be the most impatient person in the room and online. And I'm not saying that because I'm competitive. This is not something I want to be competitive about. I'm impatient. Okay? I don't like to wait I'm so impatient that I will do things that don't make any sense because I don't like to wait. right? For example, every time I get in an elevator, I just start mashing the clothes. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like anybody else do this? Am I the only side? I'm like, man, I'm like, come on, close. Because I don't like to wait for the doors to close by themselves, right? Same thing, anytime I'm at home or in my office and I'm trying to look something up on my phone and I type, if the browser doesn't load within half a second, anybody do this? I swipe down, turn the Wi-Fi up, go to data, and then go back up. And I'm going back and forth. I'm like, I don't have time. Nobody got time to wait for the Wi-Fi to load. I got to load this page now. Right? I play FIFA with my buddy Jared. I don't know if he's here or online, but it's so weird. Every time we play FIFA, my PlayStation is set up in the basement. I will pull my phone up and sign in and get in the lobby because I don't like to wait for the thing to load. Who's got time to go down, sit in the basement, and wait for it to load? I got to load it ahead of time. Right? Same thing when I'm going through the drive-thru. Please tell me, and I can't really see you guys. I hope I'm not the only person in here. I haven't been to therapy in a long time, so this is actually good for me. Just kind of get it all out. Thanks, Aaron. And you guys can be praying for me because I got issues. Anytime I'm going through the drive-thru, anybody know where I'm going with this? And you got the split? I'm counting cars, man, and people. I'm like 5-4, okay? I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, I got to go in this lane, right? Except when I'm at Chick-fil-A, then it's complicated because they have good systems. So you not only have to count the cars at Chick-fil-A, but you got to count the people with the little iPads, So I'm going, they got 7 cars in here and 3 people with the iPads, 4 cars in here and 2 people with the iPads. Okay, which one is the fastest lane? Is it lane 1 or lane 2? Which one can I get in to get my food faster? Trick question. Actually, the fastest way to get your food is to pull into the parking lot and go inside because they got 3 servers and 1 person in line. And so that's what I'm going to do right now. I don't like to wait. Right, you guys want me to give you more examples? Or you guys believe me? Yeah? I can keep going. Let me give you one. Can I give you one more? This is I feel so much better about myself just kind of getting this out here. I'm just call my life coach and be like, we don't need to meet this month. Soma City's got me covered. I'll give you one more. I don't even have a timer on my clock, so I'm just preach until, somebody yells at me. I don't like to wait for God to change people. Yeah. And I know we never put it that way. Right? I know most of us who are impatient here going like, oh, man, I'm just impatient because they're incompetent. I'm just impatient because they did fill in the blanks. But when you think about it, when you boil it down, not all the time, but most of the time, when we are impatient with people, most of the time when there is a gap between where people are and where we think they ought to be, what we are in essence saying is that I don't like to wait for God to change that person because when God changes people, it's really slow. Anybody else notice this? I probably shouldn't say this because I'm a pastor, but I think it's kind of annoying when you notice something in someone like your spouse or your kids or your friend or your boss or your neighbor that needs to change and you bring it to God's attention. God doesn't seem to have the same sense of urgency that you do. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Right? You're like, obviously they got an issue. Obviously they got a problem, God. Can you, I brought it up to their attention, and now I'm bringing it up to you, and I just don't like it. I get frustrated when God doesn't seem to move at the pace that I think he ought to move at. And so a lot of times, the reason I tell myself that I'm impatient is because they're not changing. And that's why for me, and I don't know about you, but this might be, I was thinking about it this whole week, this might be the 3 most challenging words that I have read in the Bible in a really, really long time. Love is patient. He goes on to say, it's kind, it doesn't envy, it does not boast, it's not proud, doesn't dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. That's not up on the screen because we're not going to get there today, and we will get there eventually. But before we get to all those other descriptions of love, I want to make sure that it's not lost on us, that it's no coincidence that Paul chose to begin his description of love with patience. Right? I want to make sure it's not lost on us that according to Paul, the first standard, the first baseline for our love for our neighbor is our patience. Let me make it a little bit more direct. What Paul is saying here is like, if you want to evaluate how much you truly actually love your neighbor, take a pulse on how patient you are. Right? You want to know? Right? I mean, loving people can feel so subjective, but if you want to know, man, how am I doing on this loving my neighbor thing, man? Where am I at? Paul says the very first step is to try and get a pulse on how patient you are with the people in your life. I asked the Googles to define patience for me, and here's what she said. Or he, I don't know. Look at his definition of patience. Patience is the ability to wait a long time without becoming annoyed or upset. It's weird because I got so annoyed reading that definition. I was like, that's ironic. He said the ability to remain calm and not become annoyed when dealing with problems or difficult people. According to Bishop Merriam-Webster, patience is your ability to remain calm and not be annoyed when dealing with problems or difficult people. When I first read this, I laughed. I'm like, he didn't have to put difficult in it. Just say people, right? Same thing, right? Right? That, he's saying, is what patience is. Question. You don't have to answer out loud. On a scale of 1 to 10, sorry, Beth, you just told me last week you literally hate scales of 1 to 10. But I got to do it. Literally last week, she's like, I hate it when people give me a scale, but I got to do it. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your ability to remain calm and not be annoyed when dealing with problems or difficult people? I appreciate that. I love that. You got a 9 on humility because you're like, I don't care who hears it. 2 on patience. That's a good start. Right? How patient is your love? Right? 1 being, man, I got 0 ability. 1's like, I have as much ability as the Lions have to win a game this season. That's my ability, right? And that's 0. They've won 0. 10 being, I have so much ability, and I might as well legally change my name to Patience, okay? That would be amazing. I had a friend in high school, his name was Patience. I'm like, that's a lot of pressure. Why would you name your kid Patience? Like, you don't even know anything about that kid, right? Can you imagine walking around, that's your name? On a scale of 1, how patient is your love? Right? And I know that if I pass the mic around or if we interviewed everybody in here would say, yeah, I love my neighbor. I love my spouse. I love my kids. I love my friends. I love my circle. I love the people that God has put around me. And I'm not doubting that. I'm just taking the standard that Paul is setting here and asking you, how patient is your love? Or better yet, if we interview the people around you, the people at your work, the people you live with, your neighbors, the people you interact with, if we ask them, this person loves you, how patient is their love? What would they say? Paul says love is patient. Quick qualifier before we break this down a little bit more, and this is not really the sermon, but I just feel like I need to kind of throw this in here. For the record, when we talk about this idea that love is patient in relationships, we're not talking about cases of abuse or injustice, okay? It feels like a little bit of a sidetrack, but I just want to make that clear that we're on the same page, that that's not what we're talking about in this case. Again, it's not really discernment, but if you keep reading the passage, Paul says things in here about love, that love doesn't dishonor others, love is not easily angered, love does not delight in evil, rejoices with truth, it protects, it trusts, it hopes, it perseveres. So if you're that person in the room or online right now, and you find yourself in a relationship or in some kind of thing with somebody that's abusive physically, emotionally, spiritually, what you need is not patient. What you need is to probably call 911 or call somebody that you trust and say, I got to get out of here, because based on what Paul says love is, that is not love. Amen? Can we just agree on that? Like, that's not love. Love protects. Love doesn't delight in evil. Okay, so for some of us in here, and maybe hopefully none of us in here, the starting point for this conversation may not be patient. Your starting point may be later in the verse when he makes sure you understand that if it's love, it's going to protect. If it's love, it's going to trust. It's going to hope. It's going to persevere. Now, having said that, For the rest of us who find ourselves in hopefully somewhat healthy, normal relationships where we're trying to figure out this whole love thing, what Paul is arguing here is that the starting point, now don't miss this, the starting point for this conversation about loving people is our patience. In other words, Paul is saying the first step to transforming your relationship with your neighbor is not for the person on the other side of the conversation to change. The first step is for you to become more patient. Right? That's what Paul's saying to followers of Jesus Christ. That for followers of Jesus Christ, the first step is not, well, here are 10 things that the person on the other side of this conversation, of this relationship, needs to change about themselves. No, Paul is arguing that the first step for us as followers of Jesus Christ is to say, I need more patience in this relationship. No, Paul is not saying that the person you're called to love does not need to change. What Paul is saying is that you are called to love your neighbor regardless of whether they change. He's not saying that there's no accountability. He's not saying that there aren't things that your kids and your coworkers and your boss and your neighbors need to work on. He's just saying for you as a follower of Jesus Christ, you are called to love them patiently, regardless of where they are on the journey. Love is patient. Not passive, patient. Not passive, patient. One more time for all my high achievers and go-get-em people in the room who hear patient and you think slow and you think passive. Patience is not synonymous with passive. Right? If anything, patience is the opposite. If anything, and this is going to sound crazy, but hang with me here for a second while I build the argument. If anything, patience is actually the fastest way to get what you want. Right? I know it's not really about us, but if I can make it about you for just a second, patience in every relationship that you're in is actually, believe it or not, your fastest way to get what you want. Listen to how the prophet Isaiah put it in Isaiah chapter 40. This is just so good. Listen to what he says. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 30. He says, even the youth faint and grow weary. I got any youth in the house? Where my youth at? Where my youth at? Come on, shout out youth. Youthfully shout out. They're like, woo. Are you youth, David? You're not. Are you youth? I don't know where youth is. I like to be youth. I wish I'm youth. Even the youth, he said, shall be faint and weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. Where my young men at? Right? Yeah. Boo. Yeah, I got 2 young men. The rest of y'all old men, apparently. The youth, I love this in the KJV, by the way. It's so good. Shall faint and be weary. Young men shall utterly fall. Now listen to what it says. But they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They that what? Wait. Okay, and I don't know about you, but I've read this verse like, 1,000 times, right? I remember trying to memorize all of Isaiah chapter 40 at one time in my life, right? And every time I got to this part where it says, those that wait on the Lord, another translation says, those who hope in the Lord, I just always thought about that from my perspective. Right? I always just thought, okay, like the prophet wants me to trust that God is going to do what God promised to do in my life, even when I don't see the evidence of it. Right? That's what we think when we hear this, man. I'm waiting on the Lord, man. I'm hoping in the Lord, and it's not looking good right now, and things are not looking the way I thought they're supposed to look, but I'm going to wait on the Lord. I'm going to trust that God will do what he promised to do in my life. I'm going to hang strong. I'm going to persevere. I'm going to be tenacious, and I'm just going to hope in God. And yes, that is a part of the conversation. But what if I told you this morning that there's more to waiting on the Lord than just waiting for God to do what he said he's going to do in your life? Now, what if I told you that waiting on God isn't just the business of you waiting on God to do that thing he's going to do in your life when you don't see the evidence of it? What if I told you that waiting on God is also in the business of waiting for God to do in other people what he said he will do, even when you don't see the evidence of it? Does this make sense to anybody? Do you guys see the shift? Right? Is it possible that as we read verses like this and we put them in a relational context, that as we're having this conversation about patience, God's saying, hey, you do such a good job of trusting me to work in your life, but I'm asking you right now, will you trust me? Will you wait on me to do what I promised to do in the life of your spouse, in the life of your kids, in the life of your neighbor, in the life of your boss? I know you got a timeline. I know it's not moving as fast as you'd like it to move, but I'm asking you, will you wait on me? Will you trust my work of sanctification in the lives of people when there's a gap between where people are and where you think they ought to be? Will you respond the same way that you respond when there's a gap in your life? Will you wait on the Lord? The prophet says, those who wait on the Lord, you ready for this? Shall renew their strength. They will mount up on wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not be faint. Woo! Get this. According to the prophet, waiting and patience is synonymous with strength and soaring like an eagle and running and not being weary and walking without being faint. I'm going to say that again. I got one, something for a little more than that. Come on now. Waiting. So many of us think waiting is passive and patience is just like, oh, man, well, how long is this going to go? And he's saying, no. It's the opposite. This is the plot twist about patience that people like me have missed my whole life. He's saying, no, when you wait on the Lord, waiting, patience is actually active trust in the work that God is doing. And when you do that, he says, God renews your strength. And not only that, but you actually get to soar like an eagle. You're going to run and not be tired. You're going to walk and not be faint. Translation, you will get to where you're trying to get to faster if you will wait on the Lord. I love the way my Map City friends put it. Emphasis on friends, because I'm kind of name dropping if you didn't catch it. That's what happens when you wait. You get a little bit, anybody know? Stronger, right? That's what happens when you wait. This is the backwards kingdom of God. That when you wait and when you're patient, the Bible says you actually, not only do you get stronger, you get faster because patience is a catalyst in your life. Do me a favor, look at your neighbor and say, patience is a spiritual catalyst. That was so lame. But I love you guys, so I'm going to be patient. And not be frustrated that two people. Patience is a catalyst. I want to spend the rest of our time, before I talk about how to actually do this in practice, I want to just show you, again, I know that a lot of us come in here and we're hoping, God, will you give me something? God, will you speak to me? And so when we have conversation about loving other people, it kind of feel like, well, what about me? Right? I mean, let's love other people, but I need a little bit of something. So before I talk about how we practice patience and what it looks like for us to walk in the path of patience, I just want to tell you what you get out of the equation for just a little bit, okay? These are 3 ways I want to share with you that patience changes you. Number 1, because patience is a catalyst. Patience is a catalyst for spiritual growth. So if you're hearing love is patient, and you're going, oh, man, this stinks. I don't like this, which is what I was thinking preparing this whole sermon. I just want to remind you that patience is a spiritual catalyst for growth in your life. Right? Earlier, Taylor was talking about Super Mario Bros. And Mario Kart. Right? And I was thinking, actually, the other day about playing Mario Kart. And my favorite, what do you call the boxes with the question marks? What is that called? Is it called box with a question mark? Item boxes. That's great. That's better than box with a question mark, you know? Right? But my favorite item is the star man, you know? Like, that's like, I'm just like, give me the star man. Because you get the star man, and what happens? You go fast. You go double the speed, and you get to go off-road, right? Stuff's just bouncing off of you, and I'm like, man, there's nothing better than the star. And I share that because that's what patience is for spiritual growth. Okay, patience is like the star man, right? If it's counterintuitive, I know. But when we choose the path of patience, when we lean into the way of Jesus, and Jesus tells us to wait, and he tells us to love in a way that's patient, what we're actually doing is that we're giving our spiritual growth a little bit of the star man. Let me put it this way in case it's not clear. At least this is how it made sense in my head. I hope it clicks for you because this was such a game changer for me. When you are willing to be patient with the slow work that God is doing in the life of others, you actually speed up the work that God is doing in your life. Woo, that was good. I want to clap for myself, but I won't. Maybe you didn't get it. No, I don't need the courtesy clap. I appreciate it. A for effort. No, think about it. All right, I'm only kidding. I don't need you to clap, but think about it. This is a game changer. When you are willing to be patient with what you perceive is the slow work that God is doing in the life of others, you are actually speeding up the work that God is doing in your life. Because when you're patient with the work God's doing in other people's lives, you're actually opening yourself up to say, God, change me. Right? Like when you're trusting God with the lives of other people, you're actually inviting God to do work in you. That's the good news. The bad news is the opposite. It's also true. Is that when we are impatient with the work that God's doing in the life of other people, then we actually slow down the work that God is doing in our lives. And God's saying, I know that it's them and focus and all of that stuff, and I know that the reason you're impatient is because you think they're incompetent, and maybe they are incompetent, and I'm dealing with that with them, but can I use their incompetence to show you something that I want to do in your life? Patience is a spiritual catalyst for growth. So if you're one of those people that walked in the room today thinking, man, I just want to grow spiritually. How can I grow spiritually? Paul's like, I got you, bro. I got you, sis. Patience. Love is patience. Patience is a catalyst for spiritual growth. 2 more, and then we'll get really practical. Patience is also a catalyst for spiritual freedom. So not only is patience a catalyst for growth in your life, but a life of patience is actually a catalyst for spiritual freedom. I was holding my daughter the other day, Lucy, and she's in this weird stage where she likes to just hang on to stuff. Like, none of our kids ever did this. Like, she just will remote, phone, marker, rock. Like, she will hold things in both hands, and she doesn't want to let it go. She will freak out if you, like, take it out of her hands. You know, I'm just like, okay, you know, she's nursing. She's going in the nap. She's like, I just want to hold this random item, you know? And it was interesting the other day. I was holding her, and she was holding 2 things in her hands, right? I don't know what it was, but, you know, she's holding it. And then she saw something else that she wanted. And she's like, Gaga, which is her saying, I want that, you know? And I took her over there, and I said, grab it. And I could see her mind going, I want that, but I don't want to let this go. And she's like, Gaga. And I'm like, it's right there, grab it. And she's like, ah. She's looking, I got 2 things in my hand, I don't want to let it go. And she's like crying. And I'm like, you got to like put this down so you can get this. And she's like, no, I want to hold this and I want that. And I'm thinking to myself, that's me. That's us. How many times are we like, God, I want freedom. God, set me free, man. I want to live a life that you've called me to live. I want what you have. But I don't want to let go of my expectations of people. Right? I want what you have for me, but I am not willing to let go. And the life of patience, I think it was Aaron Wang that said this. I was texting my circle about this conversation just to kind of, I'm like, I'm not good at this, so y'all give me something to work with. And she said this, patience is about letting go of our expectation of others. Right? That's what patience is at the end of the day. Patience is an invitation. God say, I know they got issues they got to work through, and I'm working on it. But are you willing to let go of your expectations that you've placed on the people around you? And if you do that, guess what? Now your hands are open to receive from God. I know it's overly simplistic the way I'm saying it, but what if it's true? What if patience, a life of patience, is not just a catalyst for spiritual growth? What if patience in your life is actually a catalyst for spiritual freedom? And so God's saying, I want you to love patiently because I want you to grow spiritually. And I want you to be free. Here's the last one, and then we'll talk practically what this looks like. Patience is a catalyst for spiritual impact. Growth, yes. Freedom, yes. But impact. Last night I was watching the last scene, one of my favorite movies. I haven't seen this movie in like a decade. Dead Poets Society. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. But it's the last scene in the movie. I don't want to ruin it for you. Normally I delight in ruining movies for people when I preach, but this one is precious to me. But long story short, this teacher gets fired, and he's packing his things, about to leave class, and it's Carpe Diem, if you've heard it, it's incredible, and these guys are in their class, and they're not supposed to, break out of their chairs or whatever, and one of the kids, anybody remember this? Anybody like Dead Poets Society? Don't do it, I know. This is how pastors go viral on TikTok, when they're like, I'm going to do an illustration, I'm going to stand on the table, and then I'm going to fall, and so I already told the band that if I fall, just come out, and I got you. I got it, yeah. Sorry, Sophie, on the camera. I probably should have given you a heads up. And you're like, hey, everybody online right now is like, hey, there's Sammy's chest. That's all we see. Right? You guys remember that scene? These guys all stand on their desk, right? Oh, Captain, my Captain. Not trying to be dramatic, but this is what patience is. Right? In a culture that's moving at warp speed, right? I promise you, no one in this culture is having a conversation about waiting and slowing down, about being more patient. If anything, all the conversations about upping your hustle and getting up and running people over and getting there before anybody else. And the Bible calls followers of Jesus to a different pace of life. And Paul is going to show us, and he's going to argue that patience is not only a catalyst for spiritual growth, and patience is not only a catalyst for spiritual freedom, but patience, believe it or not, in your life is actually a catalyst for spiritual impact, because patience demands that you not only stand up when everybody else is sitting down, but patience demands that you stand out. And so when you choose a life of patience in our culture, in our world, this is what it looks like. Is it just me, or does it blow anyone else away that Jesus was the most patient person to ever walk the face of the earth? And he accomplished more in 3 years than most religious leaders have done in thousands of years. I'm going to say that again while I try to figure out how to get down from this. I didn't think about that earlier. Oh, that was easy. Thanks. Jesus was the most patient person. I mean, it's so frustrating. When you read the story of Jesus, like, bro, really? Like Luke 5:16 says, he often withdrew to lonely places to pray. Right there in the middle of like, people need healed and there's crowds, and Jesus is like, just sneaks behind the curtain. You're like, where'd he go? It's like, he's on the other side of the lake. He's gone, man. Right? I mean, Jesus stops by Samaria, asks for a drink. Before he knows it, this lady's like, hey, you want to come back, to my town? Can you meet everybody? And Jesus shows up and like, can you stay for 3 days? And he's like, sure. I'm like, you're the savior of the world, right? I'd be like, call my assistant, okay? I'm booked for the next 12 months. Jesus was the most patient human being to ever walk the face of the earth, and yet he accomplished more in 3 short years than most religious leaders have accomplished in thousands of years, because patience is not just a catalyst for spiritual growth or for spiritual freedom. Patience is actually, believe it or not, a catalyst for spiritual impact. So if you're like, I want to grow, I want to be free, man, I want to change the world, the Apostle Paul says, well, let me invite you to the way of Jesus, a way that compels us to love. But the Christian love is not like any other kind of love, man. It's a love that's patient. It's a love that waits on God. It's a love that lets go of expectations that we have with others. Love is patient. So how do we do this? 3 quick steps to take with you on your way. How to be patient when you're not patient in 3 steps. Honestly, this was mostly for me. But please write this down. Take a picture with your phone, because I promise you there's going to come a day real soon, maybe an hour after service, maybe 5 minutes after service, when you will find yourself in that space where you are frustrated because there is a gap between what you expect of people and how they respond. You're going to say, man, this is so hard. It sounded so good when we're in the room and Sammy was preaching, but it's so hard to be patient. How do we actually practice patience, right? Not just pray that God makes us patient. That's a part of the conversation. But what does it look like to actually practice and lean into this life of patience? 3 quick steps, and then we'll sing one more song and get out of here. Is number 1 is that we need to consider how patient others have been with us. So if you're trying to figure out, man, I don't know how to be patient, just first step, consider how patient others have been with you. Newsflash, in case you missed the memo. You have so many people in your life who have been so patient with you. Okay, you got friends, you got a spouse, you got a coworker, you got a boss, you have parents. Anybody got parents who were patient with them? Remember when you were in middle school and you thought everybody was a moron and you knew what was best for your life and your parents were complete idiots and they didn't know what they were talking about? And then you look back 10 years and then you get your own kids and you're like, wow, I was an idiot. Thank you so much, mom and dad. Anybody have parents like that? Anybody thankful for a parent or for a friend or for a coworker or for a neighbor or for a mentor that was patient with you through all the ups and downs when you didn't know where you were going in life, when you jacked up your life and you messed up your life and you made a bad choice that you knew was a bad choice, but you didn't care, and yet they stood by your side and they waited for you and they kept showing up and they kept showing up, and you're like, this is the last time. They're definitely not going to come. And sure enough, they're knocking on your door. They're calling you. They're emailing you. They are waiting patiently. And now you're doing good, right? Now you can walk into church and you know the words to the song and you know verses in the Bible and you're praying. But do you remember when it wasn't so? Do you remember the people, the grandma who prayed for you on her knees? I don't know if my mom's watching. She usually is. But Mom, I remember graduating from high school saying, man, forget ministry, forget God. I want to go in the opposite direction. I literally remember telling my mom, I don't care what you think God's plan is for my life. I have a plan for my life, and it is better. And my mom just patiently smiled and just kept praying. How do we practice patience? Consider how patient other people have been with you. Number 2, consider how patient you've been with yourself. Through all the ups and downs and all the disappointments and all the seasons you've been through. You don't have to answer this out loud, but how patient have you been with yourself? I know this is not all of us, but most of us in here have been so patient with ourselves, right? And that's the irony about people like me who say, man, I'm just an impatient person naturally. I'm just not patient. That's not true, right? The irony about people who say they're impatient is that you're actually really patient when it comes to you, right? Chances are the more impatient you are, I've found in my experience, the more patient you've been with yourself. Some of us in here who struggle so much with impatience are the most patient people we know when it comes to us. And so what does it look like to be patient with other people? I think first we got to consider how patient the people in our lives have been with our growth, with our change. All the seasons they went through waiting on us. And I think it also includes us considering how patient we've been with ourselves. And last but not least, we got to consider how patient God has been with us. Man, if you don't hear anything else I say today, I hope you hear this. There has never been a day where God has not been patient with you. Not one. There has never been a day. And some of you are in the room, some of you are online, and you're like, I don't know about that second point, Sammy. People were patient with me. I'm not patient with myself, man. I condemn myself more than I condemn other people. And if that's you, I've got good news for you today. There has never been one day when the God of the universe was not patient with you. God has enough patience for you. I know you got a lot of mess. I know you got a lot of junk. I know you keep messing up. I know you keep going back to that same spot. I know you don't think you're moving forward, but God's saying, I got enough patience for you. Every day of your life, I am patient. Even though you've lost track of how many times you've doubted God, you've lost track of how many times you've forgotten the faithfulness of God, you've lost track at how many times you've messed up your life and jacked up your life and went back to the same sin that you swore that you would never go back to. You've lost track at how many times you've rededicated your rededication and promise and vow. You've lost track, and yet He never left your side. Yet He still pursues you. Yet He's still running after you. Yet He's still loving you. Yet He's still calling you. Yet He's still singing over you. Yet He's still delighting you. Yet He's still saying, you are my son and you are my daughter. I will never leave your side. I will never stop pursuing you. I will never stop delighting in you. I will never stop working in your favor. I will never stop chasing after you. Surely goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your life. There has never been a day, fam, when God has not been patient over His children. I love the way the psalmist put it. It says, but you, Lord, are compassionate and gracious. Slow to, this is so good, fam. Slow. I mean, if there's ever been a time where you should say amen to God being described as slow, it's right here. Slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness for His children. I don't know what you've been told about the God of the Bible, but that's it. He's compassionate. He's gracious. He's so slow to anger, and He's abounding in love and faithfulness for you. He's so patient with you. He is so patient with you. He is so patient.